Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. Welcome back to another episode of Wild Sacred Journey podcast. So I am your host, Kate Powell, a medicine woman, ceremonialist, shamanic practitioner, soul revival guide, story weaver. I change around whatever words all the time. Subtle body, nervous system expert, whatever we want to say, right? But in this case, I'm the fire tender for this podcast and this virtual village fire that we gather around for conversations to explore this question in these times we're finding ourselves in, which feel like the forces of dehumanization are really loud and the world feels really soulless in a lot of ways, or at least much of the human constructs of the world feel really soulless. And so how do we be more human? How do we reclaim the soul piece of being human and the heart piece of that and the messiness and the beauty of that and bring it into the world? And so thank you for being here and for engaging in those conversations. And so I like to start each episode with lighting a candle to invoke that village fire. And so even though it's just a candle and I'm using a lighter, not these old ancestral methods of tinder and flint and bow drills and all of these other things, wood, we can still sort of feel the light, the warmth of the flame. And you can still pause for a moment and just take in what a revolutionary force fire has been in the world and for our long ago ancestors, for humanity, in terms of being able to transmute things, give light, give warmth, cook food, clear things, create space for new growth, illuminate things, cast shadows on things, all the things. So in this time too, we're recording this episode and it will air right as we're kind of closing this eclipse portal for spring of 2024. And we're recording in the middle of it. And so there's a lot here about light and shadow that's been coming up, a lot around relationship and independence. And so a lot of these sort of things that feel like polarities. So, so just take a couple deep breaths in and out as you're kind of settling in to listen. And if you're feeling like a lot of tendrils of your awareness are still kind of floating out in the world around you with people, places, or things that are not right here and right now in your immediate moment, in your immediate environment, then just invite them back. Maybe feel yourself as the center point for these threads, for these spokes, so that where there might be these feelings of opposites, of paradox, of polarity, you can hold that tension because here you are in the center. You can even imagine maybe the weight of your body just leaning back so that you drop into a place of being able to listen, to receive, to arrive, to be here. Giving thanks to the land, the air, the different celestial bodies, bugs, insects, animals, reptiles, mammals, plants, trees, rocks, all the things, all the water, all the things I forgot to mention. And yeah, and then we'll go into our conversation. So today's episode is a conversation, and I'm joined by Kate Graham. And I actually connected with Kate while I was in Scotland, and I reached out to a retreat center where she works with a question, and she emailed me back and was like, "No way, we should talk. We should be friends. We have a lot in common." Also, I listen to your podcast. Name. We also have the same name. Yep. And she's like, and oh, I listened to your podcast, and can I be on it? Like, yes, let's do all of that. So yeah, so we've had some lovely interactions back and forth through email, and then some conversation over Zoom. We still have yet to meet in person, but that'll come someday. I feel fairly confident. But so we've talked a lot about shared interests of ancestral remembering and healing and connection and shamanism and human design and nomadic life and astrology, and just a kind of a vision for a world where empaths and intuition and instinct and body and heart are all kind of, and soul are all sort of more present and more prevalent and more embraced. So we're both kind of a go with the flow. Let's see where the intuition guides us. So this will probably be a very organic conversation.
Definitely will be very organic, very intuited.
Yeah. So welcome, Kate. It's great to have you. Thanks.
It's nice to be here. Yeah, nice to be spending time with you. And thank you for our fire. And I was just loving your Academy Award speech to nature.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to thank the plants and the trees and
totally
the birds,
what it was. Yeah. And then the music starts playing to get me to hurry it up.
So many more things out there in nature. Oh my gosh. I'm so thankful to you all.
And my agent. Who would the agent be? The agents would be the mushrooms. I think the mycelial world would be the agents of.
They're very good networkers, I hear.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh man,
good. I like that we started with giggles. This is good.
This is good. Start. I know. What are we? Giggles are. You got to start with giggles. So I'll read your bio though, because I always start there too.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that.
Introduce me. Oh yeah. Who am I? Who am I anyway?
Who is Kate? Which Kate? So other Kate, not me, Kate. Kate is a shamanic oracle who has done over. Although same could be said for this me, Kate. Yeah. Oh my God, we're never going to get anywhere. Oh goodness. Okay. Kate is a shamanic oracle who has done over 4,000 readings and developed the Empath Energetics Intuition Development and Archetypal Healing Program. Trained as a hypnotherapist, yin and restorative yoga teacher, Thai yoga massage practitioner, aromatherapist, reflexologist, and shamanic practitioner, Kate uses her experience, to teach people how to trust their own bodies and hearts. She has also worked on an alpaca farm, lived nomadically in a van, and moved to manage a retreat in the Scottish Highlands, all in the name of intuition. Kate helps people explore their subconscious beliefs and is passionate about deep, radical, lasting transformation. So yes, our bios read very similarly. Yeah.
I knew. Sometimes you just know and you know, right? And I was like, hey, we are cut of some similar cloth or light or, whatever.
Yeah. What's your middle name, by the way? Do you have
Amanda?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Caitlin Amanda Graham.
Oh, lovely.
You know why? It's because my mom liked drawing A's. She liked loopy letters.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Are you a Caitlin with a Y or an I?
With a Y, because she liked the loops.
The loopy letters. That's what I was guessing.
She's actually a calligraphy artist right now. That's her current her phase that she's in. So that's exactly why. Fun fact.
That's amazing.
And Amanda means deserving of love or worthy of love. How beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. So part of why I asked, my middle name's Elaine. So I'm a Catherine, not a Caitlin. Catherine Elaine Powell, which Catherine is pure and Elaine means light. So pure light, which feels very appropriate.
I love that. Oh, you know what? I'll add to my bio my spirit names because I feel like it's super relevant for this conversation, which I'm so proud to say because, I don't often introduce them if I were to be on any other podcast, right? If I was on a business podcast, that's not exactly my first, my first thought. So, my spirit name is Fire Warrior, and I was given one recently, which is Riding on Light, but it's kind of like the cosmic version of Fire Warrior. So, methinks it's like one and the same situational, maybe.
Yeah. I was given a name at one point that was that which is of the star, but recently I've kind of felt like pure light, and it was the North Star was right above us, and so it was
interesting how names develop sometimes.
Yeah, but I've been thinking recently about it feels like it wants to merge with the pure light of the Catherine Elaine, and so it's like pure light of the star,
Ooh, I love that. That's so beautiful. I was feeling the presence of one of my guides when you were opening up the fire today, and she's this star woman elder. So I'm really glad that you said that, because she just feels so much closer now. It feels like she's on my porch.
Beautiful. That's amazing. Well, welcome to her too.
Yes. Yeah.
I always have to welcome ancestors and guides that are here too, because they always show up and it's like, oh yeah,
and animals,
and
birds and bees.
Exactly. Yeah. And my agents, the mycelial world.
Agents of change as well, the mycelium.
Yep.
Yeah.
And distribution of resources, and they're pretty incredible.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So we've kind of gone there a little bit already, but I usually like to kind of formally start with that question of, in cultures around the world, people tend to introduce themselves in more of a social and lineage oriented way. Before kind of we got into this, like, what do you do for a living? It was kind of more of the who are you and where do you fit into the social fabric of things. And so I like to offer people, the option to kind of introduce yourself in some way that is more socially oriented or lineage oriented or place and location oriented, or just some force that shaped you that you want to name, or and it's a big open-ended question, so but I trust kind of just whatever comes out.
It's like a beautiful vast question as well, and it does mean a lot to me as well, because I was thinking about this. We touched on it a little bit, I think, when we chatted last, of this idea that sometimes we have soul places, so it's like, where am I from, right? And I felt compelled to say I'm from the Grahams of Montrose, because that's the line of the Scottish clan of my father's side, and that's what drew me here to Scotland. So clearly I feel like a soul connection to that side of my lineage. But my mom's side, they're Dutch, so my grandparents were all born over in what was Europe at the time. And I come from Canada, which I would consider Turtle Island. And so there's a complex connection I have with where I'm from, as far as not actually feeling quite at home on the land in Turtle Island, which is now known as Canada. And being more connected maybe to an earlier time maybe has something to do with that. And so I'm Kate, and quite nomadic and isolated. I have very small, tight family unit. That's sort of where I feel I herald from, is that that space.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. I mean, when I came back from my trip, it's funny. I would have all these friends and even some distant third, so not so distant, slightly distant, but not so distant cousins that we rediscovered in Ireland. And people kept messaging me, like, when I got back to the States, so-called United States, Turtle Island, and they would be like, when are you coming home? Meaning, like, when am I coming back to Ireland, or when am I coming back to Scotland? And I would just start sobbing every time, and it was when I first landed back here, I'd spent a lot of years developing a deep connection with the land here as part of my own sort of internal unlearning and re-indigenizing, if we kind of want to call it that, process and journey and healing journey. And I got back and I couldn't feel my connection to the land and the spirits of the land and the ancestors of the land here at all. And it was really rattling to me for a while, because I hadn't even realized how much I'd gotten used to just kind of always feeling that. And so when I suddenly couldn't feel it, I was like, oh my gosh, it was just such a reminder how I think most people kind of go through the world most of the time at this point. And I was like, well, this is terrible. Like, what? It was just such a reminder of how I lived my life for so long, and of like how far I've come. And then I remember when I first kind of felt the spirits of the land again. But what was interesting is they call me stepdaughter, and they still, like, even though I've been back now for 3 or 4 months, they're still calling me stepdaughter. And there's a lot of love there and a lot of like compassion. It's not in any kind of like a pushing away, but it's just an acknowledgement of like, yeah, like this is not my place, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that in this sense of like, oh, we all need to go back to where our ancestors came from. Cause like I sort of joke sometimes we're like the typical North American mutt, which is kind of like we tend to have very complex lineages. There's a lot of interweaving of a lot of different cultures and people, from different places. And certainly the dynamics of oppression and oppressor are, complex, deeply complex within those lineages. And I'm also very sensitive to the fact that like I'm not Irish. I may have Irish lineage, and there may be aspects of being in Ireland that feel really at home for me, but it's not because I'm Irish. And so, yeah, I think that sort of question of like, how do we start to kind of find a way with some of those that isn't also culturally appropriative, even if it is kind of in these lineages that we quote unquote have more claim to, which, I mean, even the idea of having claim to something is like a very empire colonizer like statement,
Yes.
Um, yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's such an interesting question, I think, of kind of this like of locations and intention and relationship, and then also honoring when the relationship is sort of like yeah, we can build a relationship, but this isn't for you. And that isn't necessarily like a linear or logical thing. I don't know if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't feel linear.
No.
It definitely doesn't feel linear. A little does, but
Yeah.
yeah, I really resonate with that. I think it's interesting because I did get to go home. So I lived in Scotland now for over a year. I did get to go home. I would say home because I think that my parents' home is home, so I need to call them that, even though it's like a very new house. I've never even been to that house, but
Mm.
wherever they are is home. And that
Mhm.
has shifted a lot in my lifetime. Whereas other people I know who, say people who have lived here in the Highlands their whole life and hasn't seen anything else or shifted houses at all,
Mm, mm,
from their
mm,
parents, and or stayed in the same city. We have a really different relation to also how we feel that sensitively. So I
mm,
think also the jumping around, I tend to notice that, whereas maybe some of my other family members wouldn't notice as easily. Maybe the differences of different places. And so I feel like I have this wandering to feel like, where is the strongest pulse or heartbeat? So if
mm,
I were to say some areas, like you're saying, if you're slightly removed from it in some way, in some feeling, for me, I feel slightly removed from the energy of the land that I grew up on.
mhm,
And yet at the same time, I feel like a nostalgic remembering and, honoring, like you said, and like a gratefulness, and still
mm,
some sense of like, there has to be some sense of connection to certain areas. One of the areas I go a lot in journeying is in Ontario. So for me,
mm,
I'm like, okay, I always will remember these little, or I lived by the beach during the Pandy. I was like 100 steps from the water of Lake
mhm,
Erie.
mm,
Those times and those connections, and like you say, feeling the connection with also the land and cultivating that, it still works, but yet it's like a weaker pulse,
mhm,
right? It's still there, heartbeat's
mhm,
still there, everything's still alive, you are connected. It's not impossible. You almost have to force yourself though to quiet a little bit more. You have to be
mhm,
in maybe a quiet room
mm,
to really feel
mhm,
that pulse. right? And
Mm-hmm.
I want to be where it feels like I'm like,
It's right there. Yeah.
And maybe I love intensity, right? Maybe I just love, maybe it's a fire sign thing, and not everyone has to live this way. Not everyone does. It's not for the faint of heart, you know? But that's where I want to be, is like in these really strong pulses. That's what I've been thinking about a
Mm,
lot lately when it comes to
mm,
location. And it's
yeah.
different for every person. I think every person,
Yeah.
I could feel way more of a pulse, say, I don't know, where, somewhere random, Fiji. That's a fun one.
Yeah.
I could feel something. I haven't been, but I could feel something, and you could go and say, yeah, this is really nice, but
Yeah.
kind of, neutral as far as the intensity of it. So
Yeah.
I find that really interesting. I wonder, did maybe people have different past lives or interesting stories or lineage connection there, or is part of our soul journey just guiding us there, and so it's a forward pull rather than a
Mm,
pull from behind times, right? Is it like
mm,
a forward kind of pull where we're just needing to go there in order to grow for some
mm,
reason?
mm-hmm,
I find it really
mm-hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. I mean, I know we sort of talked about this when we chatted last, but yeah, it really makes me see that vision too so clearly of um sorry, my Zoom all of a sudden decided it thinks we're speaking a different language. It popped up a
We've ascended.
notification.
We've
We have
ascended regular
ascended.
language.
Yeah, my Zoom popped up. They were like, "Oh, are you speaking a different language now?" I'm like, "I am about to say something
You've
that
gone to
is
another level here.
pretty
Something is up.
controversial." Yeah. Thanks for catching that, Zoom. Oh my gosh, what a weird. Okay, here we are. Mercury retrograde.
It's love it.
Eclipse
The
portal.
quirks.
Here we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Um yeah, I mean, I have this vision for the world. I think as climate change just continues to intensify, like we're going to have to, the idea of nationalistic geopolitical boundaries is going to become obsolete because everybody's going to become a climate refugee, and people are going to have to, the amount of livable land is going to become smaller and smaller, and we're all going to have to migrate in response to that. And I just like that's such a paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of people, because our brains are so wired to assume that the way that this is just like innate to humans, when like certainly I think circling the wagons, knowing who your people are, knowing where they're from, is like absolutely a has been around since like probably the dawn of humanity, right? Like even before the invention of wagons and wheels, circling around the fire before the invention of fire. But one of the things I was struck with too when I went to Kilmartin Glen in Scotland on the Argyll Peninsula there is they have a map. The museum had just reopened, and they have a map on the wall of as they've been tracking, there's a whole ton of like ancient sites, and like ancient sites on top of ancienter sites, like geological evidence of that. And the archaeologists have been, or archaeological and geological evidence of that. And the archaeologists have been tracking where they've been finding like the beads and the pottery shards and the cloth fragments and the different techniques. And so that through that, they've been tracking like, oh, this pigment was only seen coming from this place. And so anyway, they have a map on the wall of where they think there's evidence that at least that travel and or trade happened in this place. And this is in Scotland, like, right, like way up the northern part of the world. It's literally all over the world that things ended up here, and I think we have this idea that our long ago ancestors were like very simple and kind of silly. Like we have this very sort of condescending in some ways, like idea of our long ago ancestors and what they were capable of and how sophisticated they actually were. And this map, like just so much of that really drove home for me how much migration and movement and the understanding of the need for humans to move as well as humans to stay has like been present all throughout humanity. And people have always been butting up against each other in ways that were fruitful and in ways that were violent, you know? And um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, trade and exchange is a very challenging area to navigate as like an entire species of like individual people with individual responses. And also,
Mm,
I think so many of those decisions over time have happened through emotionality, and we almost seemingly forget it because it's this natural, like ingrained thing. But it's like we go to some person who, I don't know, has good sticks for fire. Where's the earliest back, we could find exchanging of things, but we go to what we trust, right?
yeah.
And then more and more information and more, magnification of everything has then just shifted how much data we have on any one of these ways of exchanging. Um,
Mm,
and I love the idea that actually, yeah, it's almost like there's some people who are also meant to migrate and to wander, and some people who are meant to farm land, and some people who are meant to connect with others and be part of the social, in a higher degree, and some people who are meant to lead, right? And it's a really interesting thing to think, yeah, that we weave all together that way. And one of the reasons I think I was first drawn to shamanic work was because it felt so unifying, similar to that global
mm,
view of, hey, this is kind of where we more collectively came from. There's a lot of practices that were early on before, too much um, hoarding of ground became a
mhm,
thing, or too
mm,
much like border drawing became a thing before maps were even a thought.
mhm,
We had a lot of these same practices of
mhm,
um yeah, of drumming and of dancing and connecting with people, and of herbs, and like just how simple, how sweet that is, that this is the craving a lot of people have now. It's like, I just want to be able to spend like enjoyable time. I just want to be able to thrive and not fear for things. There's been a lot of density in the minds of people for a good many years because of how much industry, how much we've grown. It's like a lot to handle mentally.
mhm.
When we think about,
Yeah.
everything's kind of got to adapt and evolve, over time. If we've grown from those people, and like you say, they were sophisticated and so are we now.
Mhm,
And there's massive differences, but there's also massive similarities.
mhm, mhm.
And so
Yeah.
are we tending to that side of ourselves, or just, yeah, degrading it almost, like you say. I really agree with that.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what do you feel like for you anyway? What do you see as kind of being the purpose or the value of sort of these more meaning making tools or shamanic tools, or like you talked about the drumming and the singing and the gathering around the fire, the storytelling, right? Like what do you feel like for you anyway, when you discovered that and it kind of felt like it took you back to a time before some of these other constructs that feel maybe more divisive or more dense or, whatever the right word is. What do you feel like that opened up for you, I guess? Because I feel like that's, yeah, I think a question a lot of people maybe have in these times is sort of like, because we're not looking back just to look back. We're like looking back to figure out, okay, where does this take us in the future? For me anyway, it feels like that. And so I guess that's, yeah, part of where I'm coming from with that question, I think.
Yeah, and what's interesting, even as you say that, so feel free to get me back on route if I travel too far off piste, is what they say in Scotland. Off piste, off path, off pace. But actually, that just kind of brings up for me that sometimes there's also people who really actually don't believe that the past is useful to us for that reason. That's more like, hey, how can we protect ourselves from doing any more wrong? And what I hear in a lot of, actually, what I hear in a lot of sensitive and also a lot of spiritual folk is like this underlying kind of disgruntledness or fear of how things are currently feeling in the world, and almost that almost like a hopeless or powerlessness, kind of like how on earth can we get out of this mess we made, is sort of the
Mm-hmm,
the wound I feel. Do you hear that from people as well, like
mm-hmm,
that same
mm-hmm,
kind of? And I think parts of it are fair, right? Like I
mm-hmm.
totally understand where it comes from,
Yeah.
and yet I love the idea that um we glean more wisdom rather than the like, oh, this is where we kind of messed up collectively along the way.
Mm, mm,
Um, and for me, definitely the portal opening of shamanic work and ancient practices has always for me held like, you know, our ancient wisdom for this modern, like, again, adaptation. It's almost like I love the idea that we're integrating fully and we're celebrating. So we're completing some of these older cycles of our ancestors. I know we chatted about this too, but I'm gonna I'm gonna try and see if it connects here with your same idea, because I love what you say about this. Hey, it almost feels like because of all this climate change, we're gonna have to disassemble some of these structures that held us in place. And so I think, well, I wonder why they held us in place. I wonder how they did that.
mm,
It's very
mm.
interesting. So I'm like almost an eternal optimist. So I will go and
Uh-huh.
see because I need to understand it all. I'll go and see, it was really cool. It was actually really cool how much we grew in such a short amount of time. So I
Mm,
get why people nowadays sort of look back at the past ancestors and go, what were they thinking? Just, beating rocks together for 100,000 years, in their mind. That's almost how I'm sure the timings aren't right on that, but
yeah,
that
yeah.
people could just look at it and go, that was such slow progress. And we've had such speedy progress recently when you look at industry
Mm,
and
mhm,
technology and all these, what humans would call advancements and all these things. I think why not? Why
mm,
not have them be advancements then? And then why not let's rise up to where it's at and then, collectively feel into what is next. We know certain things are going to continue going along that same trajectory, and other things are going to
mm,
have to disassemble to make way for that. And what I saw happening, this is maybe a few years ago now that I've gotten this impression, but it continues to remain true on like a larger scale, I'm feeling, is that almost like we were in an hourglass, and then we're going just into that, you almost get that stressful point at the
mm,
bottom of
mm,
when an
mhm,
hourglass is running out of sand, and you're like,
mhm,
it's going so fast, everything's just coming right out of there, and you kind of see it as different than, oh, hey, we're just doing a slow, sand coming out of this
mm.
hourglass. Those first few minutes, you're not even thinking about it. We got sand for days, don't even worry about it, guys. We got years and years of progress. We don't have to think about this. And then
Mm,
something happened, and something almost shifted, and so now we're just coming out of, it's like we've shifted and turned the hourglass and we're now coming out of it. And so I feel
mm,
like that squeeze neck, that sort of bottle time where
mm,
you're on the in between or you're doing that flip, it feels so disgruntling, and it feels like a lot of pressure almost now, kind
mhm,
of coming out depending on where you're focusing in this
mm.
larger energy. I hope this makes sense, this
I think so.
analogy, that
Yeah.
the hourglass, to me, it feels like we're going in from a masculine building into a feminine receptivity collectively.
Mm,
And
mm,
so the joy for me of all these ancient practices is that we had more of that receptivity and that intuition, that instinctive nature intact. So if we're
mm,
doing a kind of reset, why wouldn't we look at some of these gifts of, the community binding practices and these gatherings that were really helpful? We needed shamanic folk and medicine people and oracles and things to help us stabilize in turbulent times. So why wouldn't we go to that, since now it feels that way as well?
mm, mm.
Many thoughts thrown at you there. So
Yeah, no, I love it. Just kind of like feeling into the threads of some of the different ones. Cause yeah, I had a couple different ideas
absolutely.
pop up as you were speaking. And well,
Same.
one, when you were talking about the speed of progress, it kind of got me thinking, and how that kind of connects back to what you were saying earlier, or at least how I'm imagining it connecting back to what you were saying just a little bit before that, about kind of why we were kind of forced to stay in one place, or why we were kind of being held in one place. And it got me thinking about how when I'm putting my body into kind of like a slightly forced freeze, when I'm forcing myself to stay still, my mind starts racing over time, like in response to kind of that forced physical immobilization. The same amount of charge is moving through my system, but if I don't have a physical outlet for it, it becomes mental. And so like thinking about that on a societal scale of like, oh, maybe that's part of the reason we've had just this like massive um yeah, evolution, I guess, of sort of technology and industry and some of these other things is it's like, well, I mean, and obviously like it's connected to like, yes, if people don't have to put as much of their time and energy into subsistence, then there's more room for like envisioning and visionary stuff, you know. But again, I think there's a little bit of this like false, like that's a little bit of a false sense of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And we have this image of our ancestors as like, well, they were just struggling for survival, so they didn't like do the other stuff. And I think for me, part of the beauty of getting more into some of these meaning making tools and, you know, the tarot, the I Ching, the, you know, runes, the, you know, all of these different things, drumming, song, you know, storytelling, song, you know, shamanic healing practices, right? Is it like points to, and even the ancestral reconnection work, like when we start looking, things were made to be beautiful as well as functional, right? I mean, that's the whole thing with craft, is that it wasn't just industry, it was actually function and beauty together, because we actually desperately need spirit, and we desperately need art, and we desperately need creativity. And even as you're talking about, you know, the hourglass and the sand coming through, I'm like, oh, that's like, it's a birth canal too, right? It's like the stress of like, oh, you've been in this nice floaty soft womb, and now you're going to get like squeezed and pushed, and you're going to go through this tiny opening, and then there's going to be this like massive world, right? And but along the way there's the squeezing and the pushing and the, you know, and that they're starting to look at how actually that helps build our immune systems and our nervous systems. And that, you know, when we have too many C-sections as a default, like it's one thing to do that in times where that's like a necessary medical intervention, but like as a default that we're actually depriving babies of that process. Anyway, I'm not an expert on that, so I'm like very quickly getting out of my depth here, but um
My sister's a midwife, so it's always
okay.
funny how these types of things circle in. I'm like, you know, we weren't gonna talk about birth, but here we are.
Here we are. I
It
know.
just keeps coming back around. I'll come back
Yeah,
to it.
it does. Well, but there's something too. I think for me, part of, you know, I've been sitting a lot recently too with what is it about like sort of shamanic work or sort of this like ancestral culture that feels important to me to reclaim. And I think part of it is the idea of ceremony and the honoring of thresholds, and that we go through life in this constant sort of transmutational initiatory phase. Or, and again, I think you're right, some people may be more than others, because I think some people just carry a lot more of that like stabilizing energy, and that's like a good thing, and society needs that too. But even for those people, there's certain moments in a life, right? Like birth, death, you know, two people coming together in matrimony, right? Like, you know, so there's these moments, these alchemical moments where you take something that was in one form and it becomes another form. And that ripples throughout the village, throughout the society, throughout the lives of all those who are affected directly and indirectly, right? And we don't seem to have a whole lot of ways to honor that, which I think is part of why people feel so destabilized a lot of the time right now. Because if you have ways to honor those and kind of make some meaning out of them and feel like, okay, I may not know what the outcome is, and I'm not supposed to know what the outcome is, but I know that I can keep putting one foot in front of the other, and that people have done this, gone through this before me, and that there are people walking alongside me who may have some sense of the bigger picture, or who can at least do mirroring, or who at least kind of can hold my hand through parts of it, or, you know, that's soothing to our nervous system. And so it doesn't feel like everything's unknown, everything's scary, nobody's been here before, I have no idea where I'm going, nobody has any idea where they're going, and we're all just like flailing and screaming and like trying to deal with existential dread through memes. You know?
The modern evolution of wandering through a vast wasteland, unsure of your destination. It's just being
Yeah,
on the internet nowadays.
yeah, exactly.
Oh
um
goodness.
so yeah, I don't know, for me it feels like that's part of, I think, something that we've lost, that these older practices can kind of help us find a way back to that then helps us move forward. But yeah.
It's an interesting little thing that's coming to my mind right now, which is so I don't know the facts of this, but my one of my teachers told me that the ancient Celts, what they would do is they would walk uh, all left foot at the same time, right foot at the same time, right? So
Mm.
always marching in the same left, right, and keeping that same pace with each other because it felt like they were one unit, walking as one unit
Mm.
together. And they
Mm.
would be able to cross, 3 times or 5 times as much land with the
Mm.
power of the unit compared to if they all walked at different paces. Because they would almost, which makes a lot of sense, because they probably would have actually been shifting because of different social things or the mind getting in the way rather than the mind staying focused on left, right, at least to a certain degree. That is so soothing. And,
Mm.
from all of my working when I did body work stuff, it was a lot of it is really about like, how can we relax the nervous system, soothe people, relax them enough to open up their own like self-healing potential
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
whatever is
Mhm.
going on. And when these, ancients were walking left, right, left, right, that they're actually like healing through ripples in the
Mm.
walk, even just by
Mm.
saying like I'm providing support or I'm just there. The just there, people just being there and trusting that they're there is harder um to find nowadays, that we have so many mental like checks and complex, emotional structures. The way that we're relating to each other has really I feel like gotten more detailed.
Mm.
It's gone HD or something compared
Mm.
to this more like understood or I don't want to, I hesitate to say simpler because who knows if it actually felt or was simpler.
Mm. So are you
Yeah.
pointing to, if I'm hearing you correctly, pointing to
Yeah.
almost more like prescriptive, like that now it's a little bit more about, okay, I got to do this to relate to somebody. It's like, first I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this. And you kind of make it more prescriptive and a little bit more like doing focused instead of sort of the witnessing presence, and a little bit more of like the being together and the trusting the energy of that. Is that, am I hearing you
Well, and it
correctly on
probably
that?
really depends on where you are, where
Uh-huh.
you come from,
Yeah.
like where on the world you're currently at this moment. But I would think that with the amount of different ways we can interpret information nowadays or send information or, um, to have psychology even as a study. Well, that wasn't a
Mm.
study for a good number of years to be able to like really clearly talk about how people think.
Mm.
We have a lot more to consider in all of our relationships, and navigating those could
Mm.
probably feel overwhelming compared to the simple trust of sitting around a fire and going, yeah, that person's
Mm-hmm.
talking to themselves again.
Mm-hmm.
We would
Mm-hmm.
just let that person be. Just let
Mm.
Granny sit by the fire and do what she's going to do, or let the child, cry and let them cry until they, self-soothe or things like that. Whereas there's a lot of this like rigidity or harshness. And maybe I would say, a hazard a guess, because I've spent time now in the UK and in Canada, maybe there is something kind of just from the way that I've grown up, that it feels more rigid or restrictive,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
feels more like bound, right? But that is it's more similar in North American ways, I think,
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah,
nowadays.
I felt the same thing actually.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's this culture, particularly I feel it here in the so-called US, of gosh, we just take ourselves so seriously here and try so hard. And I'm
So
like, we
hard.
can stop. We can
A try hard
just
nation.
stop. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. We got to
that's
figure out
so
how to say
funny.
that in Latin and put that on the flag instead of like in the coins, instead of e pluribus unum. It's like trius tu hardus or like whatever it would be.
That's some good Latin right there.
Yeah. Can you tell I'm an expert?
It's,
Someone
it's, I
listening
was,
probably knows what it is and is probably like, oh my God,
if you know
just
what try
stop.
hard is in Latin, comment
Yeah.
below,
Yeah, exactly. Teach us your ways.
Yeah. I wanted to say, this is an earlier on point, so I'm glad this kind of circled back, boomeranged back, maybe
Huh?
back to me, is I really believe so strongly that two elements, a lot of our modern patterns and society kind of ways are not serving us, is like we're missing out on extended celebration, like you say, ceremony, ritual, right? These transitional periods feeling a little bit more meaningful, right? Bringing meaning to things. And also integration, like them living in our
Hmm.
body or repeating, rinse,
Yeah.
repeat. You know, we are very used to this feeling of very dynamic shifting, and we're going to now need to figure out how to just enjoy and step down a little bit sometimes as needed to be able to learn fully or to
Mm,
feel at home in ourselves
mm,
continually, you know, because the healing process for a lot of people, they can get exhausted with all of the
yeah.
change, all the shifting and naming it, and then going around the loop, but to actually celebrate more and to really rest and feel it in ourselves,
Yeah.
it feels like often forgotten right now.
I feel like what you're pointing to is, yeah, it's sort of this combination of this culture of rigidity that we're kind of talking about,
Mm,
which like
yes.
assumes then the baseline should be stasis, right? And so then change is actually like the quote unquote villain, right? Or like the problem, or the like, instead of actually that's the baseline.
Mm,
And
exactly.
like, and if we stopped assuming we should be in stasis, or we should be able to arrive somewhere, or we should be able to like hold something a certain point and a certain fixed point, then change just becomes the thing that happens. And then the tools for navigating, because that is a lot of change is challenging for the nervous system. We humans are not great at that. And I think some of that's a culture of rigidity. I think some of that's also just innate,
Mhm.
to us, and sort of how our brains at least are currently wired. And I think have been for a while. But I think there's like this, yeah, but that's, I think, part of what these practices then were meant to do, right? They were meant to help us navigate change, because they recognize that change is actually the baseline, and also we're not great at it.
Yeah, and also like it's really key to just have a community feeling okay, right? Like how
Mm-hmm.
simple is it that like maybe they'd be panicking? You know, I always think, have you seen Niagara Falls?
I still haven't been there yet,
Okay.
actually.
Well,
Yeah, on my
so
list. But yeah,
definitely do it. It's massive. And go to
yeah.
the Canadian side, please,
Uh-huh.
because you gotta. It's very interesting over there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the a mini Las Vegas of Ontario. I always say it's very silly. What's around it, but anyways, massive, massive waterfall. So much power. Very scary. Many people have died just coming
Mm-hmm.
off of that really, really high elevation and with how much power water goes through. So it's one of these like wonders and magnificent marvels. But I imagine as soon as I walked up, I said, whoa, how might this have felt if I was just a human thinking, I'm hearing water from a really far distance? You
Yeah.
know, what on earth could that be? And the rumbling. And so there are so many stories that will go back to the spirit of the mist, or, you know, stories of
Mm,
the Lady of the Mist, right? And then there would be also folklore in and around to warn people about the waters, because this is what was needed. And so, you know, storytelling and spirits and connecting to the land and saying what actually exists here, that was our way of relating to stuff. And
right.
it's actually kind of been our strength. Like you say, it's a thing that is the thing we are good at, is
Mm-hmm.
actually finding meaning and creating and
Mm-hmm.
doing more. We actually are
Yeah.
good at change. We maybe just don't feel it.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
again, I think there's been an erosion of the structures that
Yes.
helped, of the key structures that helped us navigate it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny because I'm so like not love and light, but I do love like optimist kind of
Uh-huh.
thinking and sort of
Uh-huh.
looking at this is, you know, it's interesting to think like it's very hard to do. Okay. It's almost impossible to do, really, for me as well, is to just look at, wow, how cool is it that we've gotten to this place? And, you know, I wonder what happens next, or I wonder why this all was the way this was, you know, coming to be. Because I always have this sense, and I don't know, not everyone does. So feel free to just tell me how you feel on this one. Because I actually think just we probably just have lots of people have different feelings on this. I tend to feel like there's always been the same balance of light and dark in this world,
Mm,
and that I love to hang out on the light side as often as I can. It's sort of like that's cool with me. But it feels like there was always like a similar balance of light and dark. And so when we're feeling this kind of, but we go through collective changes as well. I tune into that when I
mm-hmm,
do oracle work as well. I'll sort of read
mm-hmm,
into, oh, hey, we're all feeling, we talk about the eclipse portal.
mm-hmm,
I'm definitely feeling that. I'm not
mm-hmm,
immune to the fact that,
mm-hmm,
there's forces at play and there's other factors in all of us. But from a really simple place, we sort of grew collectively, and humans were really trying. We were really trying hard to like support each other and like do better. And a lot of things in their inspiration probably had a really clear intention, and the way
mm,
we've like gone with it, maybe it's kind of like we're running really quickly down a hill and our legs kind of fall beneath us sometimes, but we're still
mm-hmm,
traveling, right?
mm-hmm,
And so it hurts a little and we're not so graceful, but we're moving, right? And then, what is that like rolling out at the end? Like we'd rather celebrate that the person got down rather than say, yikes, like, ooh, that must have hurt. What'd you
mm-hmm.
do there?
Yeah.
And that's almost how we look at the last chunk of time that feels like it almost like we got away from ourselves, almost like human or collective wise. But I have such a faith, almost like a Mr. Rogers level of faith in like just the goodness of humans and us wanting to actually make sure we put more of this
Mm,
back together, put more of these puzzle pieces together. And that actually more figurative and literal fires, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's controversial to say more literal fires should be burned in the world, but the idea more metaphoric fires, connecting more people, more gatherings that feel more like reminiscent of these older or ancient times. It's a
mhm,
very
mhm.
simple solution, and how
Yeah.
massive a difference it would actually make if now that I will say, now that more of these spiritual and shamanic practices are being remembered, or that more meaning is being created, how nice that will be for like the next however many years for
Mm,
us all collectively.
mm, mm. Yeah. I think yeah, I feel like that, yeah, again, spun me out into a few different threads. So I'm just kind of like
Yeah,
listening and
I
gathering
know.
them
I
back
was
in
gonna
together.
I like asked for your opinion about the light and dark aspect of like whether
Yeah.
you feel that there's always inherently a balance, or do we kind of go into dark times or into light times? But I didn't even wait for a response. I just went
You just kept
went on.
going. That's all right.
Yeah. Off
Um,
piste.
I mean, I think there probably is, because again, I think too, along with sort of what we were talking about earlier, some of that, like, you didn't use these words exactly. I can't remember which ones you did, but sort of humanity always being a blight, and, kind of this, I think too, there's a lot of this. It's funny, for a while, I was talking about some of the elements of my work as being this quote unquote ancestral healing work. And then it's like, and yes, there are ruptures and things that happened in our ancestral lineages, whether that's family tree ancestral lineages or a wider definition of ancestral lineage that could include past lives, or things that are more subtle and sort of less clear than like being able to say, I descend genetically from this person and this. Um, but so but there are ruptures there that may still be present epigenetically in our body and energetically in our bodies, that we can go in and start to shift in this moment in time for ourselves, and trust that that ripples backwards and forwards and side to side through space and time, right? So yes, there is like a certain amount of healing that can happen. But again, I think too, along with sort of, yeah, this like humanity's a blight and humanity this and like some of that pessimism that, I mean, and I fall into that space sometimes for sure. Um, is this forgetting, it feels like, that there's also these gifts from our ancestral lines. And so part of what I think we're being called to do is look back far enough not to a time when there was no rupture or no violence or no whatever, because that's gone hand in hand with humanity as far as we can tell since the beginning of time. I don't think there's ever a time where humans all just like perfectly got along and, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, sang kumbaya. Um, but I think that we can go back again to maybe some of these places where some of these gifts are and apply them so that then it becomes ancestral remembering, or I'm focusing more on ancestral wisdom now and calling it that rather than ancestral healing, because I think, you know, some of what I'm hearing you point to is this need to be regenerative. Like, what are we building as these other things are crumbling, or in the place of things that have crumbled that we're actually realizing maybe we actually needed? What are we building then, rather than just focusing on, oh my gosh, it all fell apart? Like, what are we building that
Absolutely.
will start to shore stuff up? Because I think you're right. I mean, I think there is more or less a time, you know, because I think every generation has had their thing that felt like the darkest of times, right? And you know, this is not the first time there's been global plagues, and this is not the first, you know, this is not the first time for any of what's happening. Um Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right that I think there is a certain amount of like, this has kind of always been, and there's a certain amount of this is just the balance. But, and that focusing too much, I think this kind of brings you back to what you were talking about, like the celebration and bringing in more of like the lightness, you know, and people getting exhausted from healing. And so, oh, yeah, because that's, yeah, I was talking about the culture of rigidity. And I think too, there's this element of, there's also this culture of negativity and focusing on what isn't working. And I know for me, like when on my healing journey, my personal one, you know, at the beginning, yeah, I would be exhausted and drained all the time, you know, after like our weekend intensives for my training. And I would get shaman sick and, you know, all kinds of stuff. And it was just like my system shutting down to try and integrate and to try and shift and, you know, all of that. But then I've reached this point, and some of that's because I think I've worked through some of those most intense layers of charge, but a lot of it is also just an internal shift to being able to be more fluid, you know, because it's not like I don't still have seasons of intensity and seasons where I feel completely lost and without guidance, and seasons where, you know, all of that. But it's like now I have the tools to navigate it, and I have people I can reach out to for support when I need it. And I also just have this lighter sense of trust, or this lighter sense of the bigger picture that allows me to maybe not take it all quite so seriously too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, being human and being alive is like deeply meaningful and deeply impactful. And in the grand scheme of the universe, it is barely a blip. It is like a thought of a whisper of a blip. And
I
like the,
always say we are but a speck.
yeah, yeah. And so there's sort of this, like, again, this like sort of self-centeredness
Hmm.
that can be really beautiful in some ways, and also again can take itself way too seriously. And um yeah, it doesn't have to be so heavy, I think.
No, I always really love the crows, the medicine of the
Mm,
crow, and just the humor of the crow. Because don't crows always just, you know, laugh at you? They laugh at things, they laugh down. You know, here on the property that I live at, I live on a retreat center property in the Highlands. And there's a dog who's always around here on the croft. And she's always looking up at the trees, and the crows are cawing at her because she can't reach them.
uh-huh.
So they can caw all day, and she can't do a single thing about it but bark, and there's nothing she can do. They'll come down and, you know, taunt her, tease her. They'll come down to her level and then just travel back up and say, haha, we're up here now. You can't do this.
Yeah,
And
that's
how, like, yeah, how important that is. Because actually, a lot of people, it's funny. Crow was an animal that was given to me very early on in my
mm,
spirit work. So I tend to kind of go back to reflections of the crow, actually. I've got a new
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
bucket list goal unlocked, which is I want to be friends with a crow, because they'll
Uh-huh.
bring you gifts once they, know you. Oh, this is my dream in life. It's a very Disney princess kind of dream. But
I started befriending, trying to feed and befriend some of the crows at my parents' house in Virginia. And it didn't take on too well, but I think some of that's that I wasn't consistent enough. And
yes,
because
that's
it's
what's
funny,
required.
because the first day, right? And part of it was I knew I was going to be leaving soon. So I was sort of like, I kind of felt bad, like creating this whole
Yes.
relationship and then being like,
That's why I've
sayonara,
never done
suckers.
it.
I know it's really
That's
hard to be
exactly why.
nomadic and make friends with crows.
I
This
know.
is a real problem.
I miss my chipmunk friends. There's no chipmunks here. Who do I talk to?
Oh, yeah. But yeah, and what was funny though is so the first day I took out, I just had some granola and I just put it on like on a plate and I took it outside because I heard the crows kind of like yelling at me outside. I was like standing outside and the crows all started gathering in the trees around me and I was like, huh. And so I ran inside and I got some granola and I put it out there and then and then the next day, I like was a weekend and I kind of like slept in a little bit. And the crows, I think they were outside my bedroom window, like in the tree outside my bedroom window, all yelling at me to like come out and feed them. But I like didn't respond fast enough. And so then I think they were like annoyed at me. And so then, like, yeah, but I would put food out and then they would be like, they'd fly away. And then the squirrels would all eat it. But then one night I saw an owl trying to catch the squirrels. And so I was like, oh, see, so we're just feeding the whole ecosystem. So anyway, it's a whole, yeah.
Brings new meaning to granola girl.
Yeah. Yes,
But
this is what
even
I do
like
in my time.
this is another interesting thought. I mean, sorry, this one's a little bit of a tangent. This is an out
Go
there
for
one.
it.
But I think about the animals that are on different lands and like what it does to the people and how it shapes the
It
people,
totally shapes the
right? And
people.
how we've, and so it's such a strange thing that we talk about, being nomadic or, I've returned to these lands that, my great grandfather was a minister 15 minutes away from here for like most of
Hmm.
his life. So
Hmm.
I'm very close to this land, and yet I'm really sad. I miss my chipmunk and my squirrel friends, right? We only have
Hmm.
a couple squirrels around here. There's hares and rabbits, but not actually bunnies up on we're at 200 feet above sea level, so they just don't really hang out up here because there's a dog also.
Hmm. Hmm.
they, they wouldn't last very long on this property, sadly. And so but I think about that, I wonder in an area where there's different animals, different predators. I was looking at Madagascar recently. I was learning more about Madagascar for a different soul vision that I'm trying to see through. And I, saw that there's no uh, predators of humans in animal form on Madagascar. And so I was like, well, how would that shape the people? But the people, there's a lot of violence in that
Hmm.
country right now. And so it's very interesting for me to think, oh, I wonder why that is. Like they
Hmm.
could have a more peaceful I wonder what that need to fight off. And like you say, it almost lives in our nervous systems. It lives in the patterns and the ways that people have been before us, or the intensities that have come up, the just yeah, maybe what did you call it? Not disturbances, disruptions or eruptions.
Ruptures.
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 Great
Hmm.
word, great word. Yeah, yeah. And I was just thinking about how animals affect, because obviously we communicate and we sense animals, and
Sure.
our primal ancestors would have been way more connected to their patterns, even their migration patterns and how
There's
they move.
some people, yeah, who believe that actually humans learn to speak and sing because of listening to birds,
That makes
and that
sense.
we developed language because of birds, actually,
Yeah.
and like hearing how they made different sounds and then like replicating that. Mhm.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
So yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely and when you look at the stories, the old stories, like stories are so rooted in place before they became dislocated. And again, sort of the sense of like, oh, anybody can tell any story, stories were rooted in place and they included the animals and the plants and the birds of that place. And they held oral tradition memory. So they held historical records as well as then kind of more like symbolic or metaphorical or metaphysical kind of, things. and, you know, lessons or knowledge or wisdom, whatever we want to call it. But I was
Morale.
thinking too, as you were talking about the, sorry, what was that you said?
I was saying morale. Like
Oh,
some of them were like
yes.
for inspiring a change
Yeah.
or inspiring
Yeah.
like a move or something. They'd say, "Oh, the
Yeah.
winds of change are coming. We must go this way because hey, we
Right.
all got to keep moving, people. There's like a storm coming." You know,
Right.
like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
all in all the
But I
senses.
was thinking about all the tricksters when you were talking about crow, and also
Yes.
when we were talking about kind of this lightness and how we need to sort of be able to go back and forth between that like heaviness and the lightness and the, you know, the seriousness and the levity, and sort of that's so much of what those tricksters represent, and how every culture around the world has some trickster archetype, some trickster form that usually is in some kind of animal, but not always.
Yes. I had
Um,
someone called me a little, they said I had a little flavor of Heyoka in me because it's like these tricksters that, but it's a important part of a tribe, of a community, is to have this like comedian theatric kind of let's spin things on their head, you know, because it's an important
mhm.
function. So just like I say, if our world is spinning in this hourglass fashion on its head, like how useful that is to us actually to gain perspective. And how, you know, like you said tarot earlier, the fool is a totally
Yeah.
a necessary part, the first part. It's
Hmm.
the beginner's mind and that fresh perspective and lighter, like you say, right? Because when we aren't coming at it with judgment and, you know, scarcity or security finding or trying to just stabilize, right, we're just able to be in the chaos, we're able to be in the levity of things, because when it's all up in
Yeah.
the air, you know, yeah, that's, we kind of have to surrender to that. That's like kind of uncertain. A lot of
Hmm.
people struggle with that feeling, and I think to rip you know, it's almost like a Velcro rip against what you've sewn together, what you've patched together is, hey, this is
Mm.
secure. This is how, like, this is how your shoe stays on. Oh,
Mm.
what if I did that? Oh, your shoe's still staying on? Huh. Oh,
Mm.
maybe it wasn't as necessary, right? And it's
Mm.
sort of this funny like play on I think, you know, when I think of older court jesters, how unique a political advantage it was to have a really wise court jester who would be able
Mm.
to have the authorities actually listening to, this is
Mhm.
how the other side is feeling, you know,
Mhm.
in jest. I'm just going to show you
Right.
in a joking way, and if I don't joke too hard, I'm alive and I stay here in the court.
Yeah.
Right. And so could they tiptoe the line of how much can we poke at this before it unravels? So I actually, you know, I used for years I used to date a comedian. And so it's something I find really interesting.
Ah,
It's a really important thing to have this like rebel mind, this,
yeah.
and I hang out with the comedians here in the Highlands as well. So if anyone ever, you know, comes up to the Highlands, I've got some good shows for you to go to, because this is my way of getting out. I do all this serious stuff. You know, we do this deep healing work. I try to giggle at work as well. But sometimes, you know, you're just carrying around the density, you know, bringing souls up to the light. That's not easy, light, super,
Right.
you know, nothing work. Sometimes you're
Right.
in the thick of it. And so
Yeah.
for me to go down into town and laugh and just like um find some humor in anything, I think is such a joy, such a gift, such an important thing. Like this is a really
Mm.
important function of our communities and of our
Yeah.
societies. And it really, they make a lot of sense because they're looking at the world as, hey, maybe what's different or what can we challenge about it? It's a very
Yeah.
similar thing to a spiritual mind. Although, you know, I will say most comedians that I meet have a lot of like darkness with them
Uh-huh.
as well.
Sure.
They live with a
Sure.
lot of that, you know, and you kind of
Yeah.
learn that. And that's what I end up teaching whenever I do, you know, light and shadow work. That's buzzwords of the centuries, I know. But
Sure.
but light and shadow work, like it really is about this, hey, you can actually hold both. And the
Yeah.
more we believe in our ability, and you know, I work with sensitive people, the more they believe in their ability to hold this energy, to integrate it, and then they're
Mhm.
celebrating how they are doing that, then you don't stay caught in that cycle of like, oh my gosh, everything's changing and I'm not keeping up and I'm never going to keep up and I don't know how to rest, and you know, that
Mm.
that way that things can get away from us. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I love comedy because it gives us that, it is acknowledging the darkness almost at the same time. It's like
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
more pure kind of reflection of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of, as you were speaking, it kind of got me thinking about too this idea. Like, I think we have this idea. For me anyway, I feel like so many clients come to me and they're wanting to quote unquote heal because they have an agenda for what that looks like, right? Like they
Yep.
have some idealized, perhaps, or perhaps real, whatever. I shouldn't, I don't know that that's actually true, but they have some sense of who they think they are, that they're trying to get back to, that they're
Yeah.
healing back to, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times we think of healers as this force that puts things back together. And they can be, but like how often, I feel like, and I think this is some of where too what we're really missing by not having like shamans and some of these more like edge walker types of healers, right? Because there are healers who are about putting things back together again. And sometimes the actual healing work that has to come includes a dissolution first, or actually includes an unbecoming. And so that light and dark that you're kind of speaking to, and I think having these roles, the tricksters who are also kind of the healers because they're the destroyers, all these gods and goddesses that were the creation and destruction, right? Like there was so many cultures around the world have gods, goddesses, archetypes, some sort of story of a, a being or multiple beings who wielded creation in one hand and destruction in the other, because they're not separate and they have to go side by side. And um yeah, I don't know if that takes you
Absolutely.
anywhere.
Oh, I mean, it takes me so many places. Most
Yeah,
things that we
yeah,
say takes me like five different directions, and I love
yeah,
all of them.
yeah,
Yeah, for me that brings up this also this concept of, again, we were talking about like that equal light and dark, right?
yeah,
But like how necessary it is for us to just be with both and actually hold
yeah.
space for all truths or the things in between. So much of what gets people caught up, I think, is these things that they've added on
Mm-hmm.
since their life began, right? They've added
Mm-hmm.
it on,
Mm-hmm.
and so it feels like it's there, maybe it belongs there, maybe it doesn't. And so like you say, a lot of what I end up doing in shamanic work or in energy or in even hypnotherapy, right? It's like we're actually just trying to disassemble or get to the root of what is all the murkiness that people can be feeling. um but so much a part of what they're wanting to feel is just unburdened from all that. And so
Mm.
sometimes it's interesting because that the healing industry in and of itself, right, can keep people almost in this feeling of, oh my gosh, this is so exhausting. It's so
Mm-hmm.
tiring going through, all of this. Um, and so I like to ask clients sometimes just point blank, like, okay, what's the point? What are you doing this for? What are you doing this for?
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing this so
Mm.
that you can just lean back and enjoy, let's practice that a bit more, because
Mm.
it's actually it's important. And so as, critically thinking as I've been in my journey and as wise as some people, can find me to be at times, I think there's a lot of wisdom in our ability to actually be just like relatable and approachable and say, let's laugh about it for a minute. Like, yikes, that was a lot this week, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. All right. So let's actually, now we can deal with it. But let's just laugh about it first, because also that's healing, right? We need more of that. I think I have
Yeah.
this weird feeling a lot of people don't laugh as much as they probably ought to, you know,
Mm.
that there's a
Mm-hmm.
laughter deficiency. Wasn't that was in a movie, Monsters Inc. or something, they
Oh
had a laugh
yeah.
meter.
Yeah.
Take a whole I'd love to take a little laugh meter to the whole world, just see how we're doing, just get a pulse on that.
Probably not well.
I don't think so, and so I say, yeah, and yeah, some of it we do need to take ourselves seriously. There's a lot that's going on, and I certainly have, I mean, I think internally, I take myself super seriously. So at
Yeah.
least when I'm relating to others, the more that we can laugh together, the lighter, we all end up feeling. And so funny when people pass on, whenever I do mediumship work, and let me know if this is the same for you, if this is part of your practice. But often what I feel is that people let go of all their stuff when they leave, and that they've sort of dropped all those things that were hurting them and baggage and that they were carrying through in those conditions. And so if anyone's able to let go of some of them before their time is up here,
Mm,
what, like, that is such a joy. And I was thinking about that the other day, like what a cool thing. I get to do this as my life continues. I get to keep dropping maybe things that were weighing on me, or things
mm,
that felt like, that's not a part of the true, freer version of self, whatever
mm-hmm,
self is. I don't want to go too
mm-hmm.
far into, who I am specifically. It's more just the
Right.
idea of opening up to releasing all of these different ways. Yeah, the dissolution of self and the deconstruction, or the chaotic destruction of what I
Yeah.
knew of myself, is now so much more exciting. And how nice it
Mm,
is to have been able to turn the corner. Because I think a lot of people, maybe the struggle is turning that corner, to say, I trust in the, like, if I don't know what I am, I will find a new version of whoever this light, this energy is that keeps, making themselves known in
yeah.
the world. Because yeah, I tend to work with a lot of people who are in that, I almost, like, I feel really lost at this point, or I don't quite feel like myself, or
Mm-hmm,
um
mm-hmm,
that, like, and it's because it's a lot of empaths, right? Because they're
mm-hmm,
feeling everything that everyone else is
mm-hmm,
feeling. And
mm-hmm.
that's really, it's a lot of, like, what I end up, like,
Yep.
talking about and coming across. And so yeah, how do we heal more collectively, together, right? Together,
Yeah.
not apart, when it comes to sensitive people.
Right. I think, yeah, going to kind of the first part of that question that you were sort of that you asked about, yeah, with the um asking me sort of if I find it this way, or I
Yeah.
think I do. And I think for me, some of it, I feel like points to, for people, um, a couple parts. One, I think we vilified, generally, collectively, culturally, societally, it feels like we vilified reinvention.
Yeah.
So, or like the reinvention is okay in the US when we're talking about it in capitalistic terms, right? Like, oh, pull yourself up over your bootstraps, the American dream, like you
Like,
can
reinvent
reinvent
yourself if it
yourself.
gets you higher on our ladder that we've drawn
Right,
out. Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
But this idea of like, just every 7 years, your cells all have completely regenerated. And so you're like literally a new person. And, so there's like that kind of like the permission to just constantly flow and rediscover who you are and leave behind the things you thought you knew. And like that part of things, I think we've kind of gotten caught in thinking that's quote unquote flaky,
You're
and there's or
unstable or
unstable, right?
untrustworthy. Yep.
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 Yep. And so I think there's a lot of vilification of that, which I think does people a disservice. But then I think the thing I see people coming up against in that process is also, we have to trust that we have to be able to make a certain step towards, or leap towards, trusting that who we are is inherently good,
Mm-hmm.
in order to be able to trust that process of like becoming more and more of who we are, because we're going to resist the shit out of that process if some part of us is still too attached to that we're bad, that we're wrong, that we're shameful, that we're this, that we're that. Like, I think that's really the thing I see getting in people's way the most, is like, do you trust that if you let it all go, the version of you that you'll find is actually like stunningly beautiful, you know?
Absolutely.
And a lot of people seem to really, that seems to be the biggest hiccup for people.
Yeah.
Um, and so they'll keep wielding weapons against themselves and these different parts of themselves, and, fragmentation, and, um, fragmenting little souls and aspects of themselves. And, I sort of joke, we call it soul retrieval work in like the shamanic world, but I also sort of joke it's kind of like in Harry Potter with Horcruxes, and it's
I
like,
say the same thing.
we people do, they like make all these little Horcruxes out of themselves, and then they're like sending them all to live somewhere else, and then they're wondering why they're like constantly hurting and hurting the people around them, and like can't seem to get what they want. And I'm like, well, because that little part of you that you like have sent to live outside of you actually needs to come back home again. Like,
Yes. Yes. It's like if only
that part of
someone
you
had
is not the
told
villain.
Voldemort,
I
right?
know.
Someone needed to tell Voldemort, hey, there's a better way.
Yeah, I think somebody maybe tried to.
Tried
I
and
don't think he
failed,
liked it. Yeah.
sadly. And you know what's sad is that's totally a little look at how some of us feel as well, right? Some of us
Mhm.
fish swimming around in the bowl, we see the sharks, and then we go, man, that's a scary looking shark, and they got a lot of power, and they could basically own this whole ocean. And if only someone told the shark he could eat a salad, right? What would it look
Yeah.
like in that big old ocean?
That reminds me of
um,
those sharks in Nemo. Fish are friends, not food.
some great references talking about some really dark global happenings. That's great.
Yeah.
Some good
Yeah.
metaphors. Just bring it back to Disney or Pixar, and everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Ish. Yeah.
ish, strong-ish, capital-ish, I think.
Strong-ish. Yeah.
But I will say what that brought up for me is I think like a really lovely idea also of like de-inventing ourselves, the ways that we kind of got put together that don't happen to need definition anymore or don't need to be, there, or de-invent yourself and just see what happens. And it's like
Mm,
just look at the parts and the pieces
mm,
and how interesting it is. I love this idea, this vast, maybe very feminine kind of energetic idea that there's like no way to get to the bottom of like who we are. And so just enjoying the discovery of that over a
mm.
lifetime is like it's like the anti-model of find your identity and climb the ladder
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
success.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a different definition of success. It's this swirling, undoing, and also releasing and sort of freeing
It's
journey.
process oriented rather than solution
Yes,
oriented or destination
absolutely.
oriented, which like that's
Absolutely.
another thing I feel like untraining people in, like, in order for shamanic work to be effective for them. It's like, I get that you're in pain and that's valid. And I get that you want a solution to that and that is valid. And like, there's no one solution to that. Like, this is a
No.
giant process and it's actually going to take time. And you're going to start to pull the thread of the pain that you're feeling right now. And you're going to start to realize it's connected to then this and this and this and this and this, and that it's actually a whole
Yes.
web and it's a constellation. And that,
Yes.
you have to, and that there's different layers to it. And you're going to work one layer now and then another 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Like, you're going to end up working more layers of it. But I think you're right, like finding the joy in the process orientedness of it. And that, I think, is one of the benefits. We can't befriend crows very easily in a nomadic lifestyle, but I think that's one of the benefits of a nomadic lifestyle is it allows a little bit more for that mentality. Like, for me, it's both the challenge and the joy of it is that it's not, I don't want to say forcing me, but it is constantly inviting me to get a little bit more comfortable with the reinvention, with the letting go of the stuff, with the movement and the uncertainty and the riding the waves and the trusting my intuition to guide me and trusting the benevolence of the universe and trusting timing and rhythm and trusting my own internal goodness and all of those things that, I mean, some of that, I mean, obviously all of that is like innate to me, but it also has been very unlearned and then very relearned. I've had to work
Yeah.
really hard to relearn a lot of that, I think. Work hard
Yeah, absolutely.
joyfully,
Yeah,
sometimes
of
joyfully,
course.
sometimes not joyfully.
Yeah. As long as you're not trying too hard, really, that's
Yeah.
the moral of our story anyway.
Well, and I probably spent plenty of time trying too hard too. Let's be real.
But
But
you came
yeah,
by it honestly growing up where you did, so.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's
Oh
interesting
man.
too, like this inherent goodness. I totally
Mm,
I'm with you on that as well, because it's been a very much a part of my journey, this idea of like not necessarily inherent innocence, but the like undeniable innocence
mm,
of all
mm,
beings just at their core.
yeah.
That there's other forces that kind of come through us and why certain things happen. And I don't want to go into, every single situation or detail to how that would look, but I love the idea that actually we have some of these villains, these sharks, or maybe authorities, or maybe just yeah, people in really traumatized or violence seeking kind of in bodies that are feeling that way. And we have these forces at work that are, you know, the roots of what upset a lot of people. It's like these larger scale issues, and to believe in that inherent goodness of all people can be so challenging when you see
Mm-hmm.
the way that people make choices, right? They are making
Mm-hmm.
choices based on stuff that they got in this lifetime from birth to now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also, you know, we'll say sometimes they're also working on lots of lineage behind them that's
Mm-hmm.
informed them about how,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's a long game of telephone. This is
Mm-hmm.
how we got to live in the world. This is how we got to live in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
doing our
Mm-hmm.
best to pass all that down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so how much of a challenge, but how beautiful it is when we can see the whole of stuff that angers and enrages us at these like core levels, especially about global things, and be able to transmute that some way through our hearts into some light form. Like, what can
Mm-hmm.
we do to actually be able to somehow soften all of these like hard edges around all of these spiky things that we feel coming at us?
Mm-hmm.
And like, for me, for a time, definitely looking at some people and in their child form really helped me to say, hey, like, now why would a human do that? Right? That's got
Mm-hmm.
to be some story to cause
Mm-hmm.
someone, you know, to make some of these choices in these disconnected ways, or, you know, dehuman
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sort of ways. So I don't know, that gives me some sort of peace or solace, is knowing that I'm capable of at least transmuting that fear on my end, or the
Mm-hmm.
frustration, into something good. Songs,
Yeah.
music, art, however we got to channel it out, necessary in the world. Or even laughing about it. Maybe that's why I like comedians too. They take
Yeah.
this stuff and they, you know, they can actually point at it, point and
Yeah.
laugh.
Yeah. Hmm. I think for me too, I'm aware of our time and probably starting to kind of bring this down and in a
Yes.
little bit. But yeah, I think for me too, with that last piece, oh, where'd that thread go? Oh yeah. Well, it feels like for me, I think I was always pretty good at seeing people doing quote unquote bad things and being, and my thought process pretty intuitively and naturally would always go to, wow, I wonder what's hurting in them that's causing them to do that. So I think I'm someone who's always kind of been fairly decent at that. But I have not always been very good at, or at least got socialized out of, or whatever, like the ability to still channel the anger, right? And the boundaries, and not just like being a doormat, like not the forgiveness of like a doormat, but like the forgiveness of like actual true abolitionist forgiveness, which is
Mm-hmm.
like I I stand for an abolitionist and free world, which means that I am committed, devoted, whatever we want to call it, to rooting out within myself the ways in which I want to make myself or others villains, and where I believe that someone in this situation has to be a villain. And recently I've had some opportunities come up for me to kind of look at like anger and mistreatment and forgiveness, and how to like actually separate those from making either myself or someone else a villain. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, what if I can really, and I've been really, it's felt really good actually, like to be able to hold that space of like complex, yes, and like full of grief and like all kinds of other things, but this space of like, I refuse to vilify myself or anyone else to make this situation easier. And instead, I'm going to let myself feel whatever it is I need to feel, and to stay devoted to love, knowing that love sometimes looks like anger and boundaries and all of these other things. You know, sacred rage is a good thing, because it helps us know when we are getting out of balance, when the darkness, that balance between the darkness and the light is tipping more towards darkness, right? And like And so that's a good thing, but how can we be angry without having to make people into villains? Because when we make people into villains, we've dehumanized them, and then suddenly there's like this sense of righteousness that leads to violence, oppression, all kinds of other things that are not actually abolitionist. And yeah, anyway, I don't know.
At the end of the day, we all have, metaphoric hearts. And so it feels better for yours if you can approach it that way. And it can be as simple
Yeah,
as that after going through all of these measures internally,
right,
right? Is that you end up with like, yeah, you know what? That feels better to have helped
right.
myself reconcile
Be-
this.
because that's been some of it too, is I'm like, this situation continues to get worse if I let it pull me away from my heart and what I feel to be true and right. And like my choice is to love people. And there's like, and I'm also starting to learn to distinguish between loving people in that like divine love like sunshine, like it shines on everyone kind of sense, because I believe there is a level of love that everyone is deserving of, whether they've earned it or not, versus loving people as in like letting them into my heart and to occupy deep territory in the center of my being. And like, no, that actually people do have to earn.
Yeah. Well, we need a whole other podcast for that one.
I know. But when we can kind of like tease that out and create a spectrum there, when there's some space between those, then it's like, then yes, I am choosing to love this person, which means, and everybody else involved in this situation, which means I'm choosing to not let myself be pulled away from that. And that then sometimes means sending someone outside of my heart, and into more of that wider realm of love,
I call it the
vice
outer
versa.
orbit.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes people got to go to the outer orbit
they
if that inner
do.
orbit feels like too much and doesn't sit right with your heart.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Well, so this conversation didn't go anywhere we kind of thought it was going to go, but it sure went some interesting places. Uh, this was
It went
lovely.
some places. It went some
Yeah,
places we thought
yeah,
it might.
yeah. Okay, that's
That's what
fair.
happens when we both throw it to the wind.
Exactly, exactly. Hopefully it lands for at least somebody listening to it.
Some
Some
parts of
part
that
of
had
it,
to have landed. If
I'm
someone's still
sure.
here listening,
Yeah.
like some part of it's landed for sure.
Yes,
Why would you be here
absolutely.
otherwise?
That's a great way to look at it. So I'd love to offer you an opportunity to share about your work. I know you have your empath energetics training starting actually just this episode should air on your birthday, April
Oh my
8th.
gosh. You know what I didn't mention too? My mother's birthday opened up the portal, this eclipse portal,
Oh,
and mine's closing it. What a special
wow.
year
What a
for this
special
little
year.
unit. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll be near my ancestor on April 8th, my birthday. But I don't need to talk about my birthday anymore. This Empath Energetics program is way more interesting. And so yeah, it's like the sixth round that I've done this, which is really exciting, I
Mm,
have to say. I'm celebrating a lot this round myself. Just because it feels so
mm,
cool to see. I have like multiple grads coming back and taking the program. One of the grads paid for a scholarship option, and I've already
uh,
given that away. So unfortunately, the timing of this podcast means your listeners don't get the opportunity to apply for that. But the program itself is so worthy of time and
mm,
energy. It's light and shadow work and understanding energy and archetypes and story, just like we were talking about. And it's 4 months of like group and one-on-one time. And I haven't seen anything else out there like it. It's called Empath Energetics. And it's for, sensitive people wanting it not to feel like a curse at all and wanting to be able
mm,
to go get that lasting healing, that
mm,
deeper level healing that they feel is right there, bubbling, waiting for them. So it's a very
mm.
non-pressure thing. If anyone feels the call to work with me, then absolutely get in touch. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll have
and
all that information, how to get in touch with you.
great.
I'll have all that in the show notes and everything. So,
Oh,
but
that's amazing.
if you want to share anything, if you want to speak any of it out loud, you're welcome to.
No, yeah, no, that's fine. Honestly,
Okay.
I have, yeah, YouTube, but you'll have the links, and I just
Yep.
trust, people are smart. They know how to find people these days. And
Hmm.
there's this big level of trust, I think, with you put the thought out there, and I almost feel it's like you feel people coming towards you. They're ready for it. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that could probably be a whole episode on just talking about like tracking those energies when you're creating an
Yes.
offering and like feeling people's energies dipping in and dipping out and like tracking how like it
Yes.
all flows. It's pretty
It's so
crazy creating in
fascinating.
that way.
Yeah, and channeling your business. Like, let's talk shamanic business sometime. Hopefully, people get to
Oh,
listen to that. But either way, you and I can talk about it.
yeah, let's do it.
Juicy.
I know.
More fires to be lit.
More fires to be lit. Amazing. Yeah. So any last thoughts or anything last, yeah, you want to share as people to kind of close us out or to wrap us up?
Just keep following intuition in your heart because it feels better.
Mm,
And
yeah,
thank
maybe
you so
not in the
much for
short
having.
term.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah,
But
maybe there should
yes.
be some fine print on my
Yeah.
message. Hey, yeah, it was too simple. You caught the loophole that actually sometimes we got to go through it before it feels better. Fine, you have it
Yeah.
your way. Yeah, yeah, it's not all sunshine. But
Oh
it
my
does feel better, doesn't
gosh.
it?
It does.
To
It
to
sure
live in this
does.
kind of this heart-led way. And so I'm just touched to be on a podcast that centers around this way of
Oh,
being and allows me to just show up as myself. How comforting, how
yeah.
relaxing.
Amazing. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, love to hear that. Well, beautiful. Well, for everyone listening, thank you for joining us. And yeah, as Kate said, if you're still here at the end, amazing. You made it through our organic conversation. We'd love to hear if you have any thoughts. You can always, again, we'll have all that information in the show notes. You can drop us a note. You can, yeah, reach out to Kate. You can find me. Um, but we'll go ahead and just start to, yeah, just kind of take a few deep breaths in and out again as we're kind of getting ready to transition from this listening space, the space around the fire, back into the rest of your life. And maybe it's appropriate to pick up some of the threads that you dropped at the beginning, or maybe it's better to just leave them and you don't actually need to hold them. But in any case, just tune in maybe for a moment just to your breath or your body or your heartbeat or something that you can kind of feel more tangibly. And just trust that this conversation, whatever parts of it landed, will continue to ripple through your system. Maybe starting at the outer layer and working their way deeper in. Maybe trusting in some kernel of goodness within you. And trusting in the beauty of the world to hold you. And so we leave this fire for this moment, knowing we can always come back next time around. Thank you for your listening presence. And thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Hi, Kate here again. Thank you for gathering with us. Whether you've been here a while or found your way here thanks to today's guest, it means so much to me and the world I dream of to have you here. I hope you'll tune in for more of our conversations. We humans seem to be at a profound threshold and facing questions of deep impact for the future and the world. We need our full hearts and humanity as we sow seeds of change in these times of joy and heartbreak. I count myself lucky to be here now, around this virtual village fire, weaving our stories into a medicine with humans like you. As a community medicine space, this podcast is relational. It weaves webs of connection and mutual respect and care across time and space. If you appreciate and support the future we're seeding here, you can support the weaving of this web in a few ways. 1. Share episodes with friends and family or online with your community. It also helps the podcast immensely if you like, rate, subscribe to, or follow the podcast where you watch or listen, so you get notified when new episodes drop and new listeners find us as they search. 2. Join us on Patreon. Doing so supports conversations like the one you just heard and allows you access to live community gatherings and medicine circles and more as we continue to grow. It also helps me keep the space advertisement free so the conversations stay intact as they are. If you have questions, suggestions, connections, or would like to find out more about working with me, you can find me online at www.wildsacredjourney.com, on Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or email me, kate@wildsacredjourney.com. Until next time, from my heart to yours, I release today's fire with a prayer for our individual and collective wholeness, connection, and joy. May it be so.